I enlisted in October 1st, 1940, and retired in June 30th of 61. We hauled nuclear weapons for these services. We delivered them all over the world where they needed them. Oh yes, you had to have a top secret clearance to be in the organization.
So you transported nuclear weapons to theaters of operation all over the world where they might be needed.
Right. But my first experience with it was in 1952.
Could you describe what happened?
I was on a flight from Seattle coming back to Sacramento, and it was between 10 and 12 midnight. It was clear, dark night, and sitting there looking ahead, we saw this orange glow in front of us, and I didn't want to ask the pilot if he saw it, because I thought I was just tired, and he did the same thing. And finally, he couldn't wait no longer, so he asked me if I could see anything unusual. And I told him I could see this red glow out in front of us. And he felt better, and we watched it, and finally said, well, let's try to catch up and see what it is. So we added power, and we kept getting closer, and of course it got larger until we got up about Redding, California, and it went into a descent, and we followed it, and we picked up quite a bit of speed in a shallow dive, and it went clear into Sacramento and across the city and right over the Capitol building, and we were right on it. We had the aircraft red line as fast as it could go, and at that point it went vertical, and it disappeared in a matter of 2 seconds, straight up.
Did you get a good look at this?
We almost started to make it out. It was just getting larger all the time, but just at that point where we thought we was going to, in another minute we'd see it, that's when it took off. It was just a large red ball, and it just, the closer we got, the bigger it got. And like I say, it was just starting to take some kind of a shape when it went vertical.
1970s, and you were involved with the Air Force Reserve.
We were coming back from Germany in the C-141, and we were, at the time, 35,000 plus. I can't remember the exact altitude. But around 2 hours out of Dover, Delaware, and again it was a clear sky except dark, we observed this object on a radar screen, and we had two of the scopes on board. Pilots had one and navigator had one, and it was on both of them. It would come directly at us, but we could not see it visually, and then it would turn off. And it made several passes at us. In fact, one time it came directly on our nose and so close that the pilot took evasive action. At the same time, there was a civilian 747 off to our right that we could see. So we contacted him, and the pilots talked back and forth, and they were seeing the same thing we were seeing, and they couldn't figure it out. And we called the controllers in the States, and they had nothing on their screen. So all they said was to report when we landed. We went in and we made it. There was pilot, co-pilot, navigator, and 2 flight engineers. The pilot wrote up what we saw, and we all signed the statement and turned it in, but that was the last we ever heard. The only one I recall is the second flight engineer. His name was Lyle Hobart. Roughly around 1957, 58. Yeah, that's about when it had to be. Seen just about every day when the weather was clear. This was the summer months. We could look up at a certain spot and we would see this round object. We couldn't make it out, it was too high. And there was always just before dusk settled. And as it started to get dark, objects would tumble out from all around it. At least 6, possibly more. And they would start to descend and then disappear. The whole thing would disappear. The next day would be the same thing. This went on for several weeks. We tried to find out, but the only explanation ever given was it's a weather balloon. Now, of course, it wasn't a weather balloon. It was too large and too high. Weather balloons aren't that large that you could see it from that altitude. Then plus, what were the objects that fell out? Why did it disappear?
And the location was, well, where relative to the city of San Antonio was it?
It's right close to Kelly Air Force Base.
And at that time, your job in the Air Force was what?
I was in the organization flying 124s, carrying the nuclear weapons. Quite a few saw it.
Did the smaller objects that came out of it have any color that you can recall?
They were dark. That's about all I remember about them. They were dark and much, much smaller than the larger object.
Did the larger object ever move?
No, it seemed to just hover in one spot.
And after the smaller objects came out of it, how long did it remain visible?
Only, I would say, about 2 minutes after that, it was gone. And the civilian pilots in the 747, same thing. They were looking, they could not see it, but they had it on radar.
How many passes were made at your craft by this strange object?
Seems to me at least 4.
And could you reiterate how this occurred? My understanding from your previous description is that this object was detected in the distance and then it came rushing at you. Is that essentially what you experienced?
Yes.
Could you describe that?
Blip on the screen at the furthest distance that we had on our scope. And by timing it, the navigator, he worked it out, and he said it was traveling 10,000 miles plus an hour. And it did. It just come right across that screen and then turn off the last second, and then we wouldn't see it till it would come at us again. And we tried to find out if they were having some type of missile firing going on in the area, and everything was always negative.